Heyo, Paul here. Today I'm going to teach you how to dial in coffee. But first of all, what is dialing in coffee? Dialing in coffee is the process of making tweaks to your recipe that will eventually lead to a better cup of coffee. The way I dial in coffee is that I break it down into 4 different parts. The first part is brewing with the coffee. The second part is to taste the coffee. The third part is to reflect on what you're tasting. And the fourth part is to incorporate those reflections into your recipe. Most of us are familiar with step 1 and 2. You brew your coffee, you drink your coffee. With that being said, you could be brewing the same cup of coffee day in, day out for many years without it improving one speck. If you want to improve your cup of coffee, adding step 3 and 4 will make it so that you always strive towards brewing the best cup of coffee by tweaking the variables in your control. So some important items that you need when dialing in coffee include a scale and something to write in like a notebook or a phone. This will be used to both document and tweak your brewing recipe. If you want something extra fancy, check out this laminated brewing card that I've created. It makes changing variables in your brewing recipe a breeze. Link below in the description on where you can find this brewing card. This might seem obvious, but make sure to follow a recipe when you're brewing your cup of coffee. If this is the first time you're brewing with your device, just Google a recipe and use that as your starting point. Once you've found a recipe that you want to use, write down the variables. The brewing ratio is 1 to 12. We'll be using 30 grams of coffee, which will lead to 350 grams of water. Try to replicate whatever grind coarseness the guide has with your own grinder. In my case, a 25 setting will get this grind consistency, and we'll be plunging at the 4-minute mark. Now use this brewing recipe to make a cup of coffee. So you've just brewed your cup of coffee. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy this cup of coffee for a few moments. Let's dive into step 3 where we identify and reflect on the tastes. When tasting the coffee and reflecting on it, I try to make that process as mechanical as possible. The first thing you want to identify is the extraction level. Is it under-extracted? Does it have those sour notes? Is it over-extracted? Does it have those bitter notes? Once you have identified that your cup is either under or over-extracted, you want to taste to see how intense it is of that negative extraction characteristic. Meaning, is it just a bit under-extracted, or is it like the most sour plum that you've ever had under-extracted? Is it just a bit bitter, or is it like the 95% chocolate you can get that you never would buy normally? If you want to learn more about how to identify those tastes of under and over-extracted coffee, check out this video over here. If you tasted your cup of coffee and it did not have any under or over extracted characteristics, well, guess what? Your cup is balanced. So if a cup is balanced, what do you reflect on? How do you reflect on the taste of balance? You can have a really bland, balanced cup, or you can have a balanced cup that is fruity, delicious, and mind-blowing. Now, where on the scale does this cup land if it's a balanced cup? So if your balanced cup of coffee lands on the left side of the spectrum, there is still some improvements to be made. However, if your balanced cup of coffee lands on the right side of the spectrum, congratulations! You have just dialed in your bag of beans. For all other cups that aren't dialed in, we now move over to step 4. And this is where we change our recipe that we began with to incorporate the feedback of the coffee we just brewed. How can we tweak our French press brewing recipe to make an under-extracted cup of coffee balanced? Is it A, use less beans? Is it B, grind finer? Is it C, plunge later? Or is it D, all of the above? Oh, okay, so you say D. Is that your final answer? D is absolutely correct. Now, if we have a under-extracted cup, we need to take more from the coffee bean. Let's go back to the example recipe we used for the French press. The first way to do this is to grind finer. By grinding finer, you're increasing the surface area of the bean that is in contact with water, and that increases extraction. The second way to do this is to increase time. By lengthening the duration which the water is in contact with the bean, you increase extraction. The last way to do this is to decrease the amount of grinds you use. Now this is an interesting one because you can change one of these three variables to achieve the same thing. So you can increase the brewing ratio, meaning you use more water per 1 gram of coffee. You can increase the amount of water you use, or you can decrease the amount of coffee you use. Even though changing one of these three variables can produce the same results, I would recommend just changing the grind dose. This makes it so that your final cup of coffee stays the same volumetric size between tweaks. If the coffee is over-extracted, we just do the inverse. So grind coarser, use more beans, or use less time. Now over to a balanced but bland and plain cup. After tweaking our brewing recipe, going from a under-extracted cup all the way to balanced, we realized that this is a balanced but bland and boring cup. Now the big question is, how do you turn this cup into a fruity, delicious, sweet cup of coffee? This is where you tweak two variables at the same time, but in opposite extraction directions. For example, you can grind finer, which leads to an increase in extraction, combined with a longer brew time, which leads to a decrease in extraction. And that will cancel each other out and create a new balanced cup of coffee. Here are 6 combinations we can use to tweak a balanced but bland cup. Now that you've made changes to your brewing recipe, write it down and save it for the next time you brew a cup of coffee. Keep going through steps 1 through 4 until you achieve that amazingly balanced and delicious cup of coffee. At this point, give yourself a pat on the back because you just dialed in your coffee. And if you want to see how I dial in coffee, check out this playlist over here where I've started a series where I dial in every bag of bean that I brew with. So dialing in coffee is really one of those skills that you only learn through a lot of trial and error, or if someone has educated you in this craft. Even though this whole process can seem pretty daunting at times, at the end of the day, brewing coffee is just the interaction between water and bean. And I really hope that a video like this will shed some light to you, the viewer, as to how to brew a better cup of coffee at home. Until next time, peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.